All right, in the last video, we figured out our price to the consumer. This is the price that the end buyer is going to pay when they buy our beef jerky. So we figured out that our 150 gram bag of beef jerky is going to be priced around $10. We did this by looking at 3-4 different grocery stores. We went out, we did our market research, and we saw that different beef jerkies are priced at $8, $9, $11, $12, around this price range. So we figured that we're going to sell our beef jerky for around $10 because this is the price that the market's going to take. So once we figure that out, the next thing we got to figure out is our cost to the retailer. So the cost to the retailer is the price that you're going to sell your product to the grocery store chains. So we have to figure out this price because we have to make it in such a way that they also have a profit to make so that they will buy our product. Because if the retailer themselves cannot make a profit, they're not going to be able to buy our product and sell it, and you won't be able to get your products on the shelf of the grocery stores. So how are we going to do that? Let's look at the whiteboard here and I'm going to show you. Okay, so we got to figure out what we're going to sell our product to the retailer for. And the way we're going to do that is figuring out what's called the retail margin. Now, the retail margin is the percentage of the final cost, so the percentage of that $10, which the retailer is going to keep as their profit in order to sell your product, or in order to be able to sell your product and make money themselves. So how do we figure out what this margin is? Well, the margin is going to be different for every product. What I mean by this is it's more like product category. So for example, in the grocery aisles, so grocery products such as our hot sauce or our barbecue sauces, actually, and even our beef jerky is considered a grocery item. So the margin for that is anywhere between 30 and 40%. Now, different products will have different margins. If you're selling breads, they're going to be different. If you're selling meats, they're going to be different. If you're selling dairy, they're going to be different. And generally speaking, the faster the item moves, so the more volume that the store sells, or the more of a staple that item is, the lower the margins. As an example, the margins on a dairy product are going to be much less than margins on a grocery product. Because, for example, milk is going to be sold on much more of a volume. And also it's a staple. Everybody buys it. They sell through gallons and gallons of milk every day. However, they don't sell, hundreds of bottles of hot sauce a day. So the grocery margins or margins on grocery products, 30 to 40%, and the margin on something like milk, maybe 10 to 15%. So it's up to you to figure out the required margin or what the grocery stores expect as a margin, as a profit margin for your product. You need to be able to calculate this in your pricing strategy so that when you go to the buyer, you can give them a comfortable margin to work with. If, for example, you have a grocery item like a beef jerky and you give them a 10% margin, there's no way they're going to take that on because they're not making enough profit for it to make sense to them. So you have to do the research on what type of margin is required on your product. So we're going to go with grocery margins, which is anywhere from 30 to 40%. And our calculation is actually going to be based on the higher number of 40%. And this is going to be for two reasons. The first reason is when you go to sell your product or pitch your product to a grocery store chain, giving them a 40% margin is going to be much better than giving them a 30% margin because they're going to be much more willing to take on your product at a 40% margin, which means more profit for them, than a 30% margin or 35%. Not that it's not possible, but the more of a margin you give them, the more of a profit you give them, the higher the chance that they will take on your product. And this is how you get your product into stores. The second reason is if you do happen to convince them to, sell it for 35% or 30%, some grocery stores are okay with that. So if you make a deal and they're okay with 35% margin, then you actually get to keep the remainder percentage as a profit for yourself. So you always want to calculate it on the highest margin for the grocery store chain. And if you do happen to sell it a little lower, you get to keep the profit, which is an added bonus, as opposed to if you calculate it at the lower line, which is 30%, and then you actually have to give them 35%, then you're kind of now cutting into your own profits and you didn't plan for that. So let me show you how to do this calculation. Okay, so The calculation is going to be the cost to the retailer. Let me make this a little smaller here. Okay, so how are we going to calculate this? The cost to the retailer is actually going to be based on, or all our calculations are going to start from the top down, and the top number is that $10 mark, which we did our market research and we figured out was $10. So it's going to be our cost to the consumer is our starting point. So cost to the consumer, that's our $10 mark. Now, because we said we're going to calculate a 40% margin, we're going to multiply that number by 0.4. Now, if you were calculating a 35% margin, this number would be 0.35. If it was a 15% margin or something, or a 20% margin for dairy, it would be 0.20. So we're going to use 0.4. And if you multiply $10 by 0.4, you're going to end up with $4. This $4 mark is going to be the profit that the retailer keeps. So this is going to be the retailer profit in dollars. So as a dollar value in dollars. Now, the next thing we're going to have to figure out is what we're going to sell our product to the retailer for in order for them to make that $4. So we start with the same number again, cost to the consumer, $10. And now we're going to minus our retailer profit. So out of the $10 that they sell it to the customer for, $4 is their profit. So if you minus $4 from 10, we're going to end up with $6. This is going to be the retailer cost, which means that you have to sell your product to the retailer for $6 in order for them to sell it to the consumer for $10 and make a $4 profit while they do. So this is the basic strategy we're going to use for the rest of the costing and pricing calculations. So at this tier, the cost to the retailer is a 40% margin, which gives them a $4 profit, and it's going to cost the retailer $6 to buy your product. Now, the next thing we're going to calculate is going to be called the cost to the distributor, because you're going to have to pay, in some cases, a distributor to take your product to the retailer in order for the retailer to sell it to the customer. Now, you're going to have to pay the distributor for this, and there's also a margin required for the distributor because they have to make a profit as well. So click this link, and I'll see you in the next video and show you how to calculate the cost to the distributor. See you there.